There is a man sitting in Mogadishu right now who has officiated a continental final in Africa, who has been handed one of the most prestigious club matches in all of European football, and who is scheduled to crown a league champion in the Gulf before this month is over. His name is Omar Artan. He is 34 years old. He is the finest referee on the African continent, and he was not allowed into the United States. That is where this story begins. And 2 weeks later, it is still not close to being finished. On the 6th of June, 2026, Artan flew from Istanbul to Miami International Airport. He was carrying a diplomatic passport that had been facilitated through the Somali embassy in Nairobi. He had a valid U.S. entry visa. He was there for a mandatory FIFA match officials seminar ahead of the World Cup, a tournament he had been selected to officiate as one of only 3 center referees chosen from the entire African continent. He was the first Somali in history to receive that appointment. Every document was in order, every credential checked out. Every piece of paperwork a man in his position could possibly need was present and accounted for. U.S. Customs and Border Protection stopped him anyway. After 11 hours of questioning inside the airport, he was placed on a return flight to Istanbul and denied entry. The official explanation issued by CBP cited, quote, vetting concerns, without specifying what those concerns were. What came next was worse. An unnamed U.S. government official subsequently told a major news agency that Artan had been denied entry specifically because of an alleged association with suspected members of terrorist organizations. Artan himself later said that immigration officials had questioned him directly about the Somali militant group Al-Shabaab. He said he had no knowledge of the group, no formal charge has been filed, no evidence has been made public. What exists is an anonymous government source, a wire service report, and an 11-hour interrogation at the Miami airport. That is the entire documented public basis for the allegation against one of the most accomplished young referees in world football. White House Task Force Chief for the FIFA World Cup, Andrew Giuliani, personally defended the decision to deny Artan entry. U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Mark Mullen echoed that defense. Neither offered any additional public evidence beyond what had already been stated. FIFA President Gianni Infantino, speaking in Mexico City on the eve of the tournament opener between co-hosts Mexico and South Africa on June 11th, defended his organization's handling of the situation. He said FIFA was working behind the scenes to resolve outstanding visa issues, but stressed that immigration decisions ultimately rested with national authorities. That framing, that FIFA cannot override a host government's decisions on its own borders, has since become the standard line out of FIFA headquarters on every visa-related controversy this World Cup has produced. And there have been several. Before the tournament even began, Iran's Football Federation accused the United States of what it called vindictive behavior after visas were refused for key managerial and administrative members of its national team delegation. Iran's Secretary General of Football, Hedayat Mombaini, and Vice President Mehdi Mohammad Nabi were among 14 backroom staff and officials without U.S. visas ahead of matches in Los Angeles and Seattle. A State Department spokesperson said that the necessary visas for Iran's players, coaches, trainers, and some support staff had been issued, but added a line that drew its own share of attention. Quote, "We will not permit the Iranian team to exploit this system to smuggle terrorists into the United States under false pretenses." Iran's embassy in Turkey publicly pushed back on what it called a sweeping and unfair characterization of its delegation. By June 13th, 4 members of the Iranian delegation had successfully appealed their visa rejections, but 11 remained barred from traveling to the United States for matches. Among those still denied entry were Mehdi Taj, the president of the Iran Football Federation, federation vice presidents, team administrators responsible for daily operations, a media officer, and a security officer. The U.S. further restricted Iran's movements by requiring the team to depart the country the same evening their World Cup match concluded. When Iran midfielder Mehdi Tarabi's visa expired after the first game, team officials confirmed they had secured him a new multiple-entry visa only after he visited the U.S. consulate in Tijuana. The logistics of managing an international team's participation in a major tournament had been reduced to visa runs across the Mexican border. Human Rights Watch had flagged this problem months before the first match kicked off. In April of this year, the organization released a 79-page reporter's guide documenting human rights conditions across all 3 host countries ahead of the June 11th opening. The guide warned that the World Cup risked unfolding against a backdrop of abusive immigration enforcement, threats to media freedom, and discrimination. Minky Worden, HRW's Director of Global Initiatives, put it plainly. She said the tournament risked being defined by exclusion and fear rather than the inclusive vision FIFA had promised. Human rights organizations had been warning even earlier, in December of last year, that FIFA risked becoming what one group described as a public relations tool of an increasingly authoritarian U.S. government. A Trump executive order that took effect in early June barred people from 12 countries from entering the United States. Athletes and coaches from qualifying nations were exempt from that ban. But if the administration moved forward with reported plans to expand the ban to cover as many as 36 additional countries, fans from 48 of FIFA's 211 member associations, nearly 1/4 of all participating nations, would be legally prohibited from entering the U.S. to watch matches. The spectacle of a global tournament where 1/4 of the world could not attend was not a hypothetical. It was, according to HRW, an active and credible risk. Back to Omar Artan. When FIFA confirmed he would not participate as a match official, it did not simply remove him from the list and move on. It announced he would receive his full World Cup tournament fee. That decision, first reported on June 13th and confirmed by multiple outlets including the BBC on June 14th, was notable. It was FIFA acknowledging, in the only financial and institutional language it directly controls, that the situation was not of Artan's making. He would be paid for a tournament he was never allowed to attend. But the more significant institutional responses came from elsewhere. Here is what you need to understand about the centralized structure that made Artan's removal from the tournament functionally irreversible. The World Cup is jointly hosted across 3 countries: Canada, Mexico, and the United States. You might assume that meant shifting Artan to matches in Canada or Mexico would have been straightforward. It was not. FIFA's referees committee, chaired by Pierluigi Collina, had established a single centralized training hub in Miami for the tournament's entire pool of 52 referees and 88 assistant referees. Every official, regardless of which country's matches they would eventually be assigned to, was required to attend preparation sessions in Miami. The centralized infrastructure made physical presence in the United States a prerequisite for participation. A tournament built on the promise of 3 nations sharing the hosting experience equally had concentrated its entire officiating preparation structure in one. That structure left no room for workarounds once the U.S. made its decision. On June 10th, Artan landed in Mogadishu. He was met not with embarrassment or quietly arranged condolences. He was met with a hero's welcome. Somali authorities and ordinary citizens gathered to receive him. His return was treated not as a failure, but as a moment of national pride, a recognition of everything he had already accomplished to reach that point. For a country whose football infrastructure had been shaped by decades of instability and conflict, and which FIFA had invested in specifically through referee training programs as part of its post-conflict recovery programming, Artan's original selection had been presented as proof that the investment was working. His reception home reflected the understanding that no American immigration decision could undo what he had already built. Then, on June 11th, the same day the World Cup kicked off in Mexico City, UEFA made its move. Following consultations with the Confederation of African Football, UEFA announced that Omar Artan would officiate the 2026 UEFA Super Cup. The fixture, between Champions League winners Paris Saint-Germain and Europa League winners Aston Villa, is scheduled for the 12th of August at Red Bull Arena in Salzburg, Austria. UEFA President Alexander Seiferin's statement left nothing ambiguous. He described Artan as an excellent young but already experienced referee who had proven himself at the highest competition level of African football. He said, "Football is made to connect people," and that UEFA wanted to show its respect to Artan and his outstanding officiating skills that had earned him, Seiferin noted pointedly, such a prestigious nomination in the first place. CAF, President Patrice Motsepe added his own statement describing Artan as having made Somalia and the entire African continent extremely proud, personally thanking Ceferin by name for enabling the appointment. He called it a great honor for Artan and for African referees, and an excellent example of football bringing together and uniting people from Africa and Europe and around the world. The two confederation presidents were not simply making polite diplomatic statements. They were, in the public record, jointly affirming the credibility of a man a major Western government had associated with terrorists in an anonymous press briefing with no supporting public evidence. That appointment would have been a remarkable chapter ending on its own. It was not the ending. On June 19th, the Kuwait Football Association announced through its official channels that Omar Artan had been designated to officiate the match between Kuwait SC and Al-Qadsiya on June 29th as part of the final round of the Zayn Premier League for the 2025-26 season. This is not a meaningless fixture. It is the match that will determine the league championship. The designation followed a direct personal invitation from the president of the Kuwait Football Association, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Youssef Al-Sabah. The Somali Football Federation gave its approval after the invitation was formally issued and released its own statement thanking Kuwait for the gesture, describing it as one that reinforces the bonds of friendship and trust between the two countries. Think about what that sequence of events actually means when you lay it out in full. The United States denied entry to a World Cup-appointed referee and, through an anonymous official, associated him publicly with terrorist organizations. FIFA removed him from the tournament and confirmed it cannot override national immigration decisions. And then, in the 14 days that followed, 3 distinct footballing institutions in 3 different parts of the world gave him major assignments. UEFA gave him a continental club final in Austria. CAF endorsed and supported that appointment. Somalia received him as a national hero. And Kuwait, through a direct, formal, government-level invitation from a federation president, asked him to referee the match that will crown its league champion. A Gulf federation needed no multilateral framework, no memorandum of understanding, no institutional machinery. It needed a phone call, an invitation, and an approval. It chose this man, this moment, and this match deliberately. A league champion will be crowned in Kuwait on the 29th of June, and Omar Artan will be holding the whistle. That is a fact. It is happening 9 days from now, as this story is being told. The political architecture of what is unfolding here is not subtle. Each of these institutional responses, UEFA's appointment, CAF's backing, Somalia's welcome, Kuwait's invitation, has functioned as a collective answer to a question the United States raised but never actually substantiated. Is this man a security concern? Or is he simply the best referee on the African continent, whose only practical crime was holding a Somali passport at a moment when U.S. immigration enforcement was being applied broadly and without individualized public accountability? The institutions that know his work best have answered that question through action. They have given him bigger stages, not smaller ones. What is worth sitting with for a moment is the broader pattern this tournament has revealed about the collision between a host nation's domestic immigration policy and international sports' own selection processes. It is not a new tension. Sporting events hosted by countries with aggressive border enforcement policies have always carried some version of this risk. What is different in 2026 is the scale and the visibility. A World Cup, hosted across 3 countries, with centralized infrastructure locked into one, created conditions where a single national government's immigration decision could remove a FIFA-appointed official with no institutional recourse available to the sport's global governing body. FIFA's public posture has been one of formal neutrality. The governing body confirms that visa and entry decisions rest with host governments, declines to intervene beyond acknowledgement, and pays the affected official their fee. That is, in narrow legal terms, an accurate description of the limits of FIFA's authority. It is also, in human terms, a description of what happens when an institution prioritizes its relationship with a major host government over the protection of the officials it selects and credentials. UEFA and CAF demonstrated that neutrality is not the only available institutional response. Cooperation built through a memorandum of understanding between the two confederations gave UEFA the framework to act where FIFA chose not to. That framework produced a Super Cup appointment. Kuwait required no such framework. It simply acted. Whether FIFA will draw any structural lessons from this remains genuinely uncertain. The governing body has made no public statement indicating that the centralized refereeing hub model will be reconsidered for future tournaments hosted in countries with restrictive immigration environments. It has not proposed any protocol for what happens when a selected official is denied entry to the host country. It has not publicly pressed the United States for documentation of the allegations against Artan. It confirmed his removal, confirmed his payment, and moved on. That may prove to be the most consequential institutional silence of this entire tournament. The question of whether FIFA will continue awarding World Cup hosting rights to countries with aggressive immigration enforcement without building protections for the officials and participants it selects is one that this tournament has made impossible to ignore. Human Rights Watch put the problem in the plainest possible terms when it warned that FIFA risked becoming a vehicle for exclusion. The governing body has not publicly engaged with that framing. Its silence is its answer, at least for now. Omar Artan's career, in the meantime, continues to build. A continental final in Africa, a UEFA Super Cup final in Austria, a league championship decider in the Gulf, 3 confederations, 3 parts of the world, all choosing to put him on the pitch for matches of genuine consequence within the same calendar year that one country chose to bar him at the border. The story the United States wrote about Omar Artan on June 6th is not the story the rest of the world's football institutions have chosen to repeat. They have written a different one, and they keep adding pages. There is a larger political story running underneath this one, and it matters for understanding why this situation unfolded the way it did. President Donald Trump returned to the White House in January of last year, and the World Cup has been, from the administration's perspective, a prestige event on U.S. soil that it intends to control on its own terms. Trump had been publicly enthusiastic about hosting the tournament, attending high-profile FIFA events, and positioning the World Cup as a signature achievement. That enthusiasm, however, came bundled with an immigration enforcement posture that was, by the time the tournament began, among the most aggressive in recent American history. A Trump executive order that took effect in early June barred nationals from 12 countries from entering the United States. Athletes and coaches from qualifying nations were exempted from the ban, but the broader enforcement environment and the discretion it gave to customs and border officers in applying vetting concerns without any mandatory public disclosure created exactly the conditions that produced the Artan situation. An official appointed by an international body, carrying credentials that body had verified, could still be removed at the border on the basis of an allegation the government was under no legal obligation to publicly substantiate. That is not a flaw in the system as it currently operates. It is exactly how the system was designed, and it is a design FIFA agreed to when it awarded the World Cup to a hosting arrangement that placed the United States at the center of the tournament's commercial and logistical infrastructure. The opening match was played in Mexico City, but Miami, Dallas, Los Angeles, and New York are hosting the lion's share of the highest-profile fixtures, including the final on July 19th. That concentration of commercial value makes it practically difficult for FIFA to push back against American government decisions, even when those decisions directly contradict the governing body's own selection processes. FIFA needs the United States more than the United States needs FIFA's goodwill, and everyone in international football understands that. Artan himself addressed the substance of what happened during his 11 hours at Miami International. He said publicly that he was questioned specifically about Al-Shabaab. He denied any knowledge of or connection to the group. No investigative reporting published since has produced evidence contradicting his account. An anonymous official made an allegation. Artan publicly rebutted it. The public record holds both, and nothing has been officially substantiated beyond that. A man's professional reputation, built across years of refereeing continental finals and World Cup qualifiers, sits in a kind of institutional limbo created by a single unnamed government source and no formal charge. The contrast between how the U.S. border system evaluated him and how UEFA's refereeing hierarchy evaluated him is the clearest version of the story. One produced a denial grounded in an unverified anonymous allegation. The other produced an appointment to a continental final grounded in years of documented performance. UEFA's officiating standards are among the most technically rigorous and publicly scrutinized in world football. The organization looked at the same man U.S. Customs turned away and concluded he belongs on its biggest stage, in front of a global audience of tens of millions watching PSG take on Aston Villa in Salzburg in August. The question this World Cup leaves as a structural legacy, separate from who lifts the trophy on July 19th, is whether FIFA will treat what happened to Omar Artan as an anomaly or as a warning. The decision to centralize all referee preparation in Miami for a tournament officially spread across 3 countries was not inevitable. It was an administrative choice. Had the preparation structure been distributed across Miami, Mexico City, and a Canadian city, the U.S. government's decision about Artan would not have automatically ended his World Cup participation. He could have been based in Mexico. He could have been assigned to matches in Canada. FIFA's centralization made that impossible. That is a choice the organization is capable of making differently for future tournaments, if it decides the protection of its appointed officials matters enough to redesign the infrastructure around it. The next World Cup after this one goes to Spain, Portugal, and Morocco in 2030. The one after that was awarded to Saudi Arabia for 2034, a decision that drew its own sustained criticism from human rights organizations during the bid process. The gap between FIFA's stated commitments to inclusion and the actual policy environments of its chosen hosts has not been closed by this tournament. What has changed is that the gap is now visible to a global audience in real time, through a story that has kept finding new chapters when it should have been over. Kuwait is crowning a league champion in 8 days. Somalia's finest referee will be holding the whistle. Austria is hosting a European club final in August. He will be there too. The World Cup that was supposed to be his moment is being played in American cities without him. But the game has kept finding Omar Artan anyway.